It is a suspense, as Anna has said. So it takes place in Ottawa. It takes place in a time just before the present. So I started writing in 2017. So that's the time of the novel. It doesn't ever define when it is, but it's before the pandemic. So the pandemic never takes place in it. So there are three main characters. Susan is a child psychologist and a single mother. She has a 12-year-old daughter, Maddie. Susan and Maddie have been having some clashes. Maddie is wanting more independence, and Susan's having trouble adjusting to the demands of an adolescent. Then Daniel shows up. Daniel is an older man visiting Ottawa from Alberta who believes that Maddie is in fact his granddaughter, Hannah, who disappeared many years ago as a baby from the car crash that killed her parents. So the novel has sections that are told from the point of view of all three of those characters. So I'm going to read from three scenes, in each case, the first one where that character was introduced. So first one is from Daniel's point of view. Daniel almost didn't notice the two girls that morning. He was busy reattaching Tucker's leash to keep him close. In dog years, Tucker was older than Daniel's 63, but he still tried to run like a pup. Daniel relaxed against the park bench, the October sunshine warming his shoulders, idly listening to bird calls and the nearby Ottawa traffic. But something about the girls caught his eye. At first, just that they were there, walking on the other side of the narrow downtown park. Not quite teenagers, as far as he could tell, still at that coltish age. One girl with dark hair, one blonde. They chattered to each other as they approached. Then one of them laughed, the blonde with the bouncy ponytail. He froze, spellbound. That face, that hair, that dancing figure. It was like seeing Kelly again. That's how she moved as a young teen. All loose arms and legs, partway between gawky and graceful. And the laugh. Kelly laughed like that. Just like that. The girl smiled like Kelly too, with a slight twist at the side of her mouth. For a moment he was back there with Kelly on the farm. She was reaching to catch the softball he'd thrown her, practicing for the team tryout at school the next day. Patricia stood on the front porch about to call them in for supper. He blinked and shook his head, returning to the present. There'd been too many of these times lately when he found himself lost in memory. Refocusing, he saw that the two girls were leaving the park. Another thought struck him. No, it was a crazy notion, but the idea refused to budge. Could she be Hannah? No, just a trick of his brain. How could she be here? But he couldn't tear his eyes away. Now he couldn't let it go. Almost without volition, he rose to follow the girl. The girl. Here, boy, he didn't need to pull the leash. Tucker trotted beside him. Daniel strode along steadily, dodging pedestrians, staying half a block behind the girl. They crossed the street ahead of him, but he made it across before the light changed. Uneasy questions batted at him. How could Hannah turn up here after all these years? It was too good to be true. It must be his imagination. He'd been wrong before. But he kept moving, making sure not to let the girl get too far ahead of him. She does look like Kelly. Patricia's voice had whispered in his head. That's not imagination. He took a deep breath, trying to clear his mind. He'd been hearing Patricia's voice more often lately. Sometimes it was a comfort, like she was still with him. Other times it gave him the shiver. It doesn't matter how she got here, just don't lose her now. So now, that was the first section with Daniel. Now this is section with Susan. She's the only one whose scenes are written in the first person. I rushed in the door after a long day at the clinic. Maddie was upstairs in her room. I hardly ever saw her before dinner anymore. chicken breasts were thawing on the counter and I was rinsing vegetables at the sink when the phone rang. It was Nicole Abada. Susan, did Maddie mention anything about a man following her and Emma today? What? No, I haven't talked to her yet. Emma said there was an older man with a dog. He was outside the school this afternoon, and when they got to the park, he crossed the street behind them and followed them along the pathway. That didn't sound too worrying. It's a public pathway. He probably was just taking his dog for a walk. Maybe, but she said he was behind them all the way to your house. What do you mean, to our house? That's what she said. The girls went inside and watched out your window. He came up the steps from the park, stood on your street, and stared at your house. A prickle of unease washed over me. Are you serious? Yes, she's sure he was following them. My unease grew. Did she say anything else? Not really, but Matthew and I don't like it. So she'd already discussed it with him. What are you suggesting? Matthew thinks we should report it to the police. There's not a lot to report. Some guy came and stared at the house. I couldn't imagine the police doing much with that story. She sighed. Well, why don't you talk to Maddie, find out if she noticed anything more, and call me back after. Sure. I hung up and stared, unseeing at the vegetables draining beside the sink. Emma's parents and I try to coordinate our rules for the girls, since they're best friends and do everything together. This fall, we agreed to let them walk to school on their own now that they were 12. Their route through our small park and along a few busy streets seemed safe enough. Maybe we were wrong. Dinner could wait. I called upstairs to Maddie. After a long minute, she opened her door and came to the top of the steps. Am I in trouble? Why was that the first thing out of her mouth? It's not like I'm always on her case, though sometimes she acts like it. No, but I want to ask you something. She slouched down the chairs and sat on the bottom step, staring at her hands. Her hair, released from its ponytail, fell forward over her face in a blonde curtain. I wanted to brush her hair aside, but restrained myself. Sweetie, I started. She frowned at me, glowering. She told me not to call her that anymore. I began again. Nicole says a man followed you and Emma today. She wrapped her arms around her knees. Yeah, there was a guy, but it was no big deal. Was he really following you? Maybe, she shrugged. He was behind us for a while, and then he came up and stood out front. Emma said he was at your school, too. She saw him there. I didn't notice him till the park. Did he say anything to you or approach you? No. She tucked her hair behind one ear. But he did stay in front of the house for a while. It was kind of weird. What did he look like? She shrugged again. He was just some old guy. He had a dog with him, a big yellow one. I sighed. Why didn't you phone me, or at least tell me about it when I came home? She rolled her eyes. Why? We handled it. Emma came into our house till he went away. She bit her lip. Maybe he was just lost. Well, I didn't want to make more of it than it deserved, or project my unease onto her. Come into the kitchen so I can make dinner while we talk. Maddie followed me, stooping to pick up Oscar, our aging tabby. She stood in the window with him, gathered in her arms, and her face buried in his fur. I began chopping the vegetables and chicken I'd assembled for a stir fry. Did the guy seem threatening at all? I asked. She slid into a chair at the kitchen table. Just forget it. He didn't really do anything. Scraping a pile of red pepper cubes to the side, I started in on the mushrooms. Time to change the subject before this escalated into a full-blown argument. Can you set the table, please? The stir fry came together quickly, and we talked about other things as we ate. Halloween, school, TV shows. The thoughts of the guy watching our house hung on my mind. So in this final section I'll read is from Maddie's point of view. This is after she and her friend Emma have met with the police along with their parents. Maddie was half hoping the man would be back. She lay in bed, unable to sleep, the events of the afternoon swirling through her mind. It had been pretty exciting. She hadn't told her mom everything. After they noticed the guy in the park and decided he'd been following them, Emma was the one who wanted to escape. Quick, let's go to your house. But Maddie hadn't wanted to leave. Not yet. The guy had a dog with him. She'd always liked dogs. Emma was pulling at her elbow. Come on, let's go. The guy had stopped and was bent over, maybe tying a shoelace. Maddie gave in to Emma's urging. They scurried out of the park and raced across the road. Maddie fumbled in her backpack, digging underneath her books for her house key. She wasn't used to having her own keys yet. Emma bumped up behind her as Maddie retrieved the key, and they both crowded against the door. Maddie shoved the key into the keyhole. Emma whispered, "Oh my God, there he is. He's coming up the steps from the park." Maddie opened the door and Emma pushed into the hallway behind her. "Hurry!" Maddie locked the door and dropped her backpack on the floor. The girls ran to the front window. They peeked carefully around the curtains, making sure he couldn't see them. Maddie could feel Emma trembling beside her, and her own knees wobbled. The guy was standing out on the street, staring in their direction. Emma's arm pressed hard against hers as they watched. The man seemed old, but not ancient. Thin but strong-looking, white hair, lined face. The dog, a big dog with yellowish light brown fur, sat quietly beside its owner. Watching the man, Maddie couldn't help thinking he reminded her of Grandpa. It was a dumb idea, but that didn't stop her having it. Finally, he turned and went back into the park, the dog following. Maddie sank to the floor. "Oh," she said, "that was weird." "He might not be gone," Emma said. "He could just be waiting in the park." Maddie glanced at her friend. Now that the guy had left, she was sorry it had ended so soon. Nothing this interesting had ever happened to them. And he did remind her of Grandpa. They were still wearing their jackets. She turned to Emma. "Let's go back out and see if he's still there." "No way, are you crazy?" This was the part Maddie hadn't told her mom about. "Come on, there's two of us. What's he gonna do?" Emma shook her head, arms folded. Maddie gave up. If Emma was scared, she'd go on her own. "Okay, stay here. Leave the door unlocked so I can get back in fast if I need to." She ran to the park steps and edged her way down, peering carefully around the bushes to the path below. Her stomach quivered as she crept down the steps, half expecting the man to be waiting there. But he'd left. She could make him out in the distance, striding with his dog beside him, heading toward Bank Street. She'd watched him, wondering if he'd turn and see her, but he didn't. Now, as she lay in bed, Maddie wondered again about the man. He had definitely been following them, and having him come up the steps and stare at their house, it made her stomach feel like it did when they were waiting for the roller coaster at Wonderland last year. Partly thrilled, partly scared. Was he dangerous like her mom and Emma's parents thought? But he had that dog. Aren't people with dogs usually nice people? Maybe he was just lonely. She couldn't help thinking about him. The novel carries on from there. I won't be spoiling the plot to tell you that Maddie disappears. Susan is sure Daniel has taken her, but he has an alibi, and the police search his house, and there's no sign of her. So now Susan fears for her daughter even more. The search for Maddie is on. So I'll leave it at that.